Hey class, our team, the Cluesniffers, are going to demo our Clueless version in this video. First off, let's start off by introducing the masterminds behind this game. That's us from the left to right. That's Aang, Key, Anthony, Rebecca, and Sid. Okay, that's enough of us. Let's go ahead to see the good stuff. In this video, we'll start off by showing our game panel and discuss the different components of the Clueless interface. Then we'll show how we run the game from 4 separate computers connecting to the server. And after we get into the game, we'll play a bit of the game, but the gameplay may not be realistic in a strategic sense. We just want to show the navigation and the state changes in the game. We'll show the navigation in Clueless, which is getting to rooms and hallways. We'll also show like the game state changes. That'll be when the character make suggestions, accusations, or disproves. Last but not least, we'll show the ending scenarios, what happens when a player loses or when a player wins. Let's get started. Okay, so here we see the entire game panel. We'll start off with the upper left corner where we see the game board. We see the 9 main rooms with their names on it. We also see the 12 hallways connecting to each respective rooms. And on each hallways we see the different characters. We see Miss Scarlet in red. We see Colonel Mustard, and then the white dot is Mrs. White, and then the green dot is Mr. Green. We also have the blue dot, which is Mrs. Peacock, and last one we have the purple dot, which is Professor Plum. And also on the game panel, game board, we also see the small square in the room. They're the secret passage, and when a character goes in the secret passage, it'll lead them to the diagonal rooms across. So now onto the right side, we see the game status. This is the important part of the game. This is where all players see the player interaction in real time. So in game status, it broadcasts information of the game state. We get to see when we're waiting for all players to arrive. It'll show status saying that we're waiting for players. After all players are present, the game will start. And then it'll also show that assign characters to you, and you'll show who you're playing with as. And then it'll also show during each turn whose turn is it, and then it'll broadcast to all players. And then the way we design the game will assign the first person to join a game as the first player in their turn, and then goes in order like that. In the status panels, we'll also show suggestion information. So when the characters make a suggestion, everyone can see, all the players can see. But when a player make a disprove of a suggestion, only the player receiving the disprove card will receive the information in their game status. All the other players won't get to see that. We also get to see who made the wrong accusation and who lost in the game status. And of course, it also shows who won in the game status when the game ends. After that, we'll move down to see make a move panel. This is where players get, during their turn, they get to use this panel to see what available moves they have for their characters, and they have checkbox to select to move to. And after they move to for example, a room, they get to use the panel on the right, the suggestion and accusation panel. This is where they can make suggestions based on the different characters and the weapons, and then they can make suggestions or accusations during their turn. When after a suggestion, other players can make the disprove, and disprove panel is above that. Disprove panel will show the cards each player have initially assigned to when the game starts, and then during the disprove turn, they can use the select the checkbox that they want to choose to select to disprove. And when a character sees a disprove on their game status, they can use the detective notes on the bottom left side, and then they can use the checkbox to record down what information they got, what clues they have to make their decision as they proceed on to the game. After we have a basic idea of how our game board looks, let's go ahead and start playing Clueless. Before that, we need to start the game. Here we have 4 computers, meaning we have 4 players waiting to play the exciting game of Clueless. To access Clueless, one of the computer will act as the game server. After the server is up and running, the other computers can connect to the game by typing in the IP address of the server into the Clueless application. So this computer here is running the game server. That's the IP address that the player who wants to join should enter. That's the IP address, and this is the first one to run. So this player will also be the player that will be the first in turn. We see that the server sees 1 client. This is the second player, has the IP address, and is in the game, also waiting for other players to join. This is the third player, also with the IP address, and waiting for the 4th players to join. So the last player with IP address and is joined. And then after having all 4 players, we can start, the game will initiate, and then players can start playing the games. All the game boards are updated with the initial information, and they're all assigned with a player. Let's get the characters moving. We want to show characters can move into a room. After they are in a room, they can make suggestions of a suspect, murder weapon, and location. And after the current player makes a suggestion, we also demo how other players can disprove current player's suggestion during each round. So now what we see in the game board, we see the initial state when the game's first initialized. And then now it's Miss Scarlet's turn because she is the first player to play. It's Miss Scarlet's turn, so she gets to select on a move in the move panel, and she decides to move to hall. Press OK, and a GUI will update Miss Scarlet's location into the hall room. And then after she is in the room, she can make a suggestion. What suggestion should you make? She decided to suggest Mr. Green as the murderer with the weapon of knife in the location of hall. After that, Miss Scarlet will wait for the disapproval of other players to disprove her suggestion. Now it's Colonel Mustard's turn to disprove. Looking at the list of cards that Colonel Mustard have, he doesn't have anything to disprove what Miss Scarlet suggested of Hall, Knife, and Mr. Green. So all he can do is press the Make Disprove button to show that he has no cards to disapprove. Next up, it's Mrs. White's turn to disapprove. Alright, Mrs. White, looking at the list of cards Mrs. White have, she can disprove the murderer, Mr. Green, as that's the first card Mrs. White have. So she selects Mr. Green, sorry, and then makes the disapprove. Okay, back to Mrs. Scarlet's screen. We see that in the game status, Miss Scarlet sees the disapprove card of Mr. Green from Mrs. White. And after that, knowing this, she can go to her detective note and mark Mr. Green in her to record down. Checkbox. And there it is. We saw how Miss Scarlet moves to the room, and after making a move, she can suggest and wait for other people to disapprove, and then she calls Mr. Green into the hall room with her, and we see the updated location for each character. How characters can move into a room, we now want to show how characters can move out of the room into the hallway. We have 2 scenarios. One is when the character just moves to the hallway, and another scenario is when all hallways are blocked and the character is stuck in a room and the character have to skip its turn and then wait for its next round of turn. Alright, so now this is Colonel Mustard's turn to move, and all the characters are in there in the hall room, and then so he's the first one to move out of the hall room, and he has 3 hallways that he can move into, he'll just go with one of them. Okay, so there he goes to the hallway, and since he's moving from room to hallway, he cannot make any suggestions. Now it is Mrs. White's turn to move. Since Mrs. White is in a room, she can only move to the hall room, and one of the hall room is now occupied by Colonial Mustard, and since hallway can only hold up to one character, so Mrs. White can only have 2 hallways left to go to, so she just chose the first one. There she goes. Now it's Mr. Green's turn to move. Like Mustard and White, Colonel Mustard only have 1 hallway to move from, and that's where she goes. Alright. Actually, skip ahead a bit. We want to show that characters can move to secret passage through a room diagonal to the room they're currently at. So this panel we're seeing is Colonel Mustard's panel, and then it's his turn to move. So looking at his move panel, we're going to select to Conservatory, which is where the secret passage leads to, and press OK. And then we see on the GUI that Colonel Mustard moves to straight across the game board diagonally to Conservatory. And now we want to show the ending scenarios. In this scenario, we want to show where a character makes a wrong accusation and gets kicked out of the game. So in this turn, Miss Scarlet decided that she wanted to it's her turn to make a suggestion. She wanted to make an accusation instead. Look at her detective notes, it's pretty filled up. She feels like she has a pretty good idea who the murderer is. So she decided to make an accusation. She decided that she'll accuse Miss Scarlet that uses a weapon of knife at the study room. Make accusation. Oh no, Miss Scarlet loses. It's not the right scenario. She got kicked out of the game. It's now Colonel Mustard's turn. Now for the exciting part. Looks like Mrs. White has her detective note pretty filled out. I think she has a pretty good idea who the murderer is and what her weapon is and where the murder was committed. So this is now Mrs. White's turn, and this is her player panel. She decided that it's her turn to make a suggestion, so she'll make an accusation instead. She selected Miss Scarlet, and with the weapon of knife at the hall room, she's going to make the accusation. Mrs. White made the correct accusation. She's the winner of Clueless. That ends the game, and Mrs. White is the winner. And that will be all, folks. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the demo.